This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com in review, and what I'm looking at today is 2014's Black Mountainside, directed by Nick Shostakovich. And this is a really interesting movie, and it has a lot to recommend. First off, Black Mountainside relies primarily on practical effects. They're not a lot, but when they make their presence known, they're pretty effective and very interesting and more realistic than you may typically be used to seeing. And this movie has such high production values, which is to say that for the most part it takes place in the Canadian wilderness. So nature is literally his backdrop, and it's a gorgeous, beautiful looking film, very evocative of John Carpenter's The Thing. And you can tell from watching the movie that Shostakovich really admires Carpenter, and he's created a similar dynamic with his movie, which is to say 4 or 5 men isolated with a growing menace among them. It's an interesting idea and one that works very well for this movie. It's very atmospheric and very taut, which is nice. Though I mentioned John Carpenter earlier, and this is probably its movie's greatest weakness, oddly enough. Now keep in mind, the thing about John Carpenter is that his career is so idiosyncratic, so distinctive, which means when people do call-outs and homages to his work, you can pretty much tell right off the bat what they're referring to. This can be good, this can be not good, depending on the situation. For instance, The Void was a pretty good movie, though it bothered me that it was so similar to a lot of Carpenter's work. Doesn't make it bad, it does make it very similar though. So, in the case of Black Mountainside, it's very similar to The Thing, but the movie veers away from it in some really interesting ways that make it actually more similar to Wendigo, the Larry Fessenden movie, than John Carpenter's movie. And the thing is, I'm reasonably certain that more people have seen The Thing than have seen Wendigo. If it had went exclusively in that direction, I think it would have been a benefit to the movie, and it would have made the movie make more sense. As it stands, its foundation is a little weaker than it should be because of that admiration for John Carpenter and his work. And here's the scene that undermines the movie just a little bit. As you can tell, it goes a little bit into body horror. That's not the problem. The thing is, to give more detail on the story, the men who are in this remote location are involved with the Canadian government, and they do research. So some pottery has been discovered of an Indian people who shouldn't be in that area, so they're really shocked. They go to investigate to find out more information about the discovery, and they learn that there's this structure, most of it buried underground, and it's distinctive in ways that those Indians that they're interested in aren't. In fact, they have no idea of what this structure actually is. Throughout the entire movie, it remains, for the most part, buried, so we don't know either. But what we do know is that it appears to have a very baneful influence on anyone in proximity to it. You know, bad times are on the way when someone decides to massacre a house cat, which happens, and the body is splayed out in front of the structure that they partially uncovered. Things go pretty bonkers from that point. Though in reference to the scene I just showed you, it's a bit of body horror. The problem is that it doesn't fit the story, because it's been discovered that through the death of one of the members of the survey team, that there's a virus present, and it affects men's minds. The problem is that they shouldn't have shown any physical manifestation of this virus other than the actions of the individuals who have caught it. By them showing this arm twisting and deforming, it tells you that there is clearly something wrong, as in there's some type of agent mutating and changing people. That's a problem. The thing is, if they hadn't have done that though, you would have just people suddenly beginning to act out, to become violent towards themselves as well as each other. And you wouldn't have a reason for it beyond the talk of a virus. And the thing is, if the virus has no manifestations other than violent and self-destructive behaviors, then you couldn't necessarily tell, even if the doctor was uninfected. You would have no way of knowing if he's a reliable narrator or if he isn't. In the case of this movie, he's definitely reliable because we've seen on screen that something is going on physically with these people in terms of their bodies distorting and shifting. It doesn't work well because we don't see it often enough. It literally happens just once. And it doesn't really forward the narrative when it does happen. If that scene worked in a movie, the antagonist would be one of two things. It would mean that the virus is actually real, or it would mean that there is indeed something supernatural. And the movie veers towards that being the case when we see a creature manifest, which is very similar to the creature we saw from Larry Fesseden's Wendigo. And with either of those options, the movie would have been much more satisfying and I think make a lot more sense. In any case, what do you think? This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com in a review. Do you agree, disagree? Let me know down below. And as usual, consider a like or a follow.